Good evening, good evening. Welcome to Saturday Night Conversations. This is the meetup for Christians who would like to live a life that truly matters, who want to live an intentional life. And the goal of our meetup is pretty simple. We want to find out how we can make Christ-focused decisions in different aspects of our life. Work, love, life, literally every aspect of our life. And the goal is so that we can live a life that really makes God happy. And if you're finding me for the first time, my name is Tola with a dot under the O. My Nigerian friends like to call me Tola. Yes, so let's just go straight into tonight's conversation. Tonight, we're going to be talking about fighting sexual temptation. Yes, I have decided it's time we have a conversation about that. But before I go straight into that conversation, I want to do a little digression, something still along the lines of what it is that we're still talking about. And it's primarily along the lines of, look, what do you do when someone actually gets caught in sexual temptation? Now, what I'm going to list out, sort of highlight, is applicable to any sin. It's not only just for sexual temptation, but today we are focusing primarily on sexual temptation. And so the examples I'm going to be giving are going to be tailored along those lines, right? Okay. So addressing the sin. So there are basically 3 steps if you want to address the sin. And like I said, it applies to every other sin. The first step is confront. You need to confront the sin. Now, the question is this: once you confront the sin, what are you expecting in terms of response from the person who is involved in the sin? You expect the person to confess or own up. But the thing about it is that sometimes it can actually happen the other way around. The person confesses, and then the other person, who is the person who is trying to address it, maybe the spouse in this case, now confronts like, oh, how could you do this? Whatever, the usual things that come with it. But bottom line is this: you could go either way. You could have the person confront and he confesses, or he confesses and then he confronts. So after confronting, the next step which you go to is discipline. Now, the goal of discipline is not to punish the person for the sin that the person has done. I repeat, the goal of discipline is not to punish this person for what the person has done. The goal of discipline is to show how hurt the person involved here is this. That's the overarching thing. The goal of discipline is to show how this person is hurt. Because if you are saying you want to discipline the person as a way of showing how for the person to carry the burden of his sin, you're basically saying the sacrifice of Jesus Christ was not enough. And so what we're saying is you move from confront, the person confesses, and then it goes to discipline. Now, there is something that I have not included in this, my journey, and that is forgiveness. Now, what most people expect, the traditional thing a number of people say is that, look, once you confront and the person confesses, automatically you should forgive. It doesn't always happen like that. The overarching thing with forgiveness is that before you move from discipline, it is important that this person needs to have forgiven. So forgiveness can happen after the person confesses or when the person is actually undergoing discipline. Either way, it works. So when this person is undergoing discipline, what is supposed to be his response? His response is that he's expected to submit to discipline. So, for example, the wife finds out that the husband has an extramarital affair, and the discipline the wife gives is that, look, I'm not happy. I don't want you to sleep with me in the house. The room. You go and sleep in the guest room. The husband cannot be like, but I've already confessed now. You don't need to do this. No. The person who is guilty has to submit. Submit is the overarching responsibility that he or she, whoever it is, has in this particular matter. Now, we're saying at this point in time, one major thing needs to have happened. The person who has been hurt needs to have forgiven. Because if the person who has been hurt has not forgiven, then it's near impossible to move to the next step. Because the next step is actually where we focus on restoration. And the goal of restoration is to rebuild trust. You're not saying you have not forgiven. The thing behind forgiveness is Forgiveness can be freely given, but trust usually has to be earned. And that's what you go through during the restoration process. And what you're supposed, the person who is involved in that sin during the restoration process, he or she is expected to show accountability. And the way it goes is that, for example, let's say it was, in this example, sexual sin. We're saying during the process of restoration, in terms of showing accountability, it could be a case of, look, everywhere I'm going to go, I'm going to tell you, if I'm on the road, I'll call you. Once I leave the office, I'm going to come back home straight. I'm not going to deviate from whatever. The whole idea is this: you're trying to rebuild trust. And an example in the scripture that I can talk about going through this is the story of King David. So you had David, he was confronted by Nathan, he confesses his sin, he goes through discipline. God says the son which you've given birth to is going to die. The son dies. And there was even another discipline that happens way later. God says that, look, you did this sin in the secret, but I'm going to do it to you in the public. Your wives will be slept with by someone in public. As it turns out, it was his son that actually did that. That's his son Absalom, who slept with his concubines, meaning that David went through this process, and throughout the process, when the baby died, he basically submitted to God. He didn't go banging his head, arguing with God. And even when his son planned a coup d'etat, tried to execute him, whatever, David basically just submitted, because to a large extent he understood this was the discipline he had to go through. And he went through his restoration process. So I just felt it was important for us to just sort of do this as a quick digression for tonight, before we go straight into tonight's conversation, fighting sexual temptation. Now, the scripture verse that I want us to embrace for tonight, that sort of gives us the signpost and the guiding principle, which is going to help every one of us to overcome sexual temptation, comes from James chapter 1, verse 14 and 15. I have it here. It says, "Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions. When sinful action is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death." I'm going to underline a couple of things. So it says temptation comes from desires, and these desires drag us away. And these desires, after they've dragged us away, they give birth to sinful actions. And these sinful actions, when it is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. That's sort of like the anatomy that the scripture paints in terms of how temptation happens to us. And the truth is, if we really want to overcome this battle, we need to really break it down, as in sort of go through the whole 9 yards. So, just let me get my board for us. Yeah. So, you've got the first one. He talks about temptation happens when you have desire. Now, he now says desire, each one is dragged away by the desire. The way that means is that, look, desire finds an opportunity to express itself. And once desire has an opportunity to express itself, it moves to the next stage, sinful action. And once sinful action is allowed to reproduce itself, it leads to death. It looks pretty simple. I think this might actually explain it a little bit more better. Now, the bigger your desire, the more you take advantage of all the various opportunities for that desire to express itself. Let me explain something. You cannot try to trap a dog by using leaves. If you're going to set a trap for a dog, you probably have to use a bone, beef, meat, something the dog is going to eat. And that's what this is highlighted based on James chapter 1, verse 14 and 15, that desire that you have, when the opportunity presents itself, you take advantage of the opportunity. And as you're taking advantage of the opportunity, various sinful actions are happening. And as these sinful actions are happening, as they are allowed to grow, the impact of this is that, look, there are a couple of things that begin to die. Number one, a healthy fear of God. You begin to lose your healthy fear of God. Psalm 130 verse 4 says, "With you there is forgiveness, therefore you are feared." So please don't believe the typical thing everybody is saying, "Oh, the reason that I don't want to hurt God is because I love him, etc. and everything." Look, loving God is not just, it's sometimes loving God is not really the strong hindrance for you not to sin. Sometimes a healthy fear of God is actually stronger I don't remember who said, he said, look, the remedy for a particular fear is actually having a bigger fear. So if you have a healthy fear of God, it might actually keep you from going this route. So anyway, we're talking about the various deaths that you may experience, that people experience along this line. Number one, healthy fear of God dies. Your conscience begins to die. You don't begin to feel a sense of, oh, you're doing anything wrong. You don't have that sense of it. And if it is allowed to continue, it gets to a point whereby your relationship with God begins to die. And as you go along that line, if you still continue, you now get to the point whereby your eternal hope actually dies. And effectively, what has sort of happened is that you've more or less walked out of your faith. Hi, Aminat. You've more or less walked out of your faith. But the point everybody thinks is that, look, it's not possible for you to walk out of your faith. But James here is saying that, look, if you continue along these lines, you can lead to death. And the highest form of death is actually death that separates from God. But let's come back to this image that I have here. And what we're saying here is this: desire is the biggest thing. Meaning that if there is no desire, then there is no way you're going to take advantage of opportunities. A classic example in the Bible I can lay hold of is the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph had an opportunity. The boss's wife said, come and sleep with me. No matter how pretty the boss's wife is, Joseph did not have that desire. And because Joseph did not have that desire, he did not take advantage of that opportunity, and he didn't have any sinful action, and the rest of it is history. Meaning that if we're going to make a decision fighting temptation, a number of us fight temptation at the wrong place. We're trying to fight temptation when opportunity presents itself. You are, let me use the word, a step too late when you're trying to fight temptation at the point of opportunity. Where you need to fight temptation to increase your chances of winning against sexual temptation is actually at the point of desire. But the question you now ask me is, what drives desire? That's the important thing. What drives desire? And really, desire is driven by what you see, what you taste, what you touch, what you hear, and what you smell. Meaning that if you want to, let me use the word, put your desire at a manageable level, you need to manage all this. Now, I'm going to give a bit of a personal example. I rededicated my life to Christ towards when I was in my teen years. And at that point in time, I was having a lot of challenges maintaining my sexual thoughts. And I remember reading the scripture that says, any man that looks lustfully on a woman has already committed adultery with her. Meaning that I don't have to actually commit the act. Just the fact that I'm having lustful thoughts about someone already means that I've already committed the action. And so I knew that I needed to do something to take, let me use the word, to take control of my lustful thoughts. And so what did I decide to do? I decided to address what I was seeing. And let me tell you what I did. Number one, I banned myself from watching wrestling. And the reason why I banned myself from watching wrestling was that those days, every time the wrestlers come, they always come with a lady who would accompany them. And the lady was usually almost semi-not dressed. So I was like, I didn't want to be seeing those images. The second thing I banned myself from watching late night movies. Yes, it was before the era of Netflix, Amazon Prime, name it, everything, whereby everything was video on demand. Basically, if you wanted to watch a movie, if you didn't go and rent the cassette, you had to wait until maybe the TV station showed late night movies. And most late night movies always used to have a sexual scene. And so for me, that was also something I had to cut out. And during that period, by cutting out that, I was able to build my resistance and not have that desire for sexual sin and things like that. But one of the things I tell is that, yes, that is like more or less, I was more or less going cold turkey. For those who are familiar with people who go through addiction, for me, that was like going through cold turkey, whereby I basically banned myself. But what I found myself doing on a constant basis that, look, even if I don't have to take those sort of drastic actions, I need to be taking, let me use the word, small step-by-step actions every day to show that, look, I don't want to feed this desire. Because the thing with this desire is that, look, this desire is not only fed by active engagement. So, for example, you are beginning to desire that you want this. No, it actually also is actually fed by auto-suggestions. So, for example, you are in a you always hang out with people in which they're always talking about women of a particular type of shade, of a particular type of shape or whatever. Let's imagine your wife is not of that particular type of shade. If you continue hanging out with that kind of that kind of people who have those kind of conversations, don't be surprised that when someone who shows up with exactly those proportions which they have described shows up, even if you've never had the desire actively, just because somebody has told you consistently that, look, oh, the best type of women are this, the best type of women are this, and you don't see that in your wife, you may end up falling for that temptation when the opportunity presents itself. So back to the point I was trying to make about the necessity for you sometimes to make, as it were, smaller actions. So for example, I remember there was a time in which I was having a conversation with my best friend at that time. So we were facing each other, having a conversation, and just casually my face just wandered this direction. And as my face wandered this direction, it was almost instantaneous. My face went this way and just came back this way. My friend who I was talking with saw the way my face went, and he too was like, what's this? He looked, and then his face turned back at me. I was like, Tola, that was the best thing. What happened? Some person just showed up because we were on the corridor, just showed up on the sidewalk, just walking on her way. But the way she was dressed, she was pretty busty, and at the same time, the way she was dressing was very revealing. And so for me, I was just like, look, there's no need for me to look, and I just turned my face. Now, by doing that sort of action, gradually, what I'm doing is I'm not feeding that, let me use the word, unconscious desire. Because the more you feed your mind feed your eyes based on what you see on these sort of things, those desires will begin to build in themselves gradually. And if you don't have that, then you run the risk that when an opportunity presents itself, you might fall. But it's not only that you have to have actions for you to protect yourself against what you see, taste, touch, hear, and smell. There's something which I've also introduced here, and that is the need for you to have filters. Very important. Now, what do I mean by filters? So, for example, you're watching a movie. Let's imagine it's even a good movie. You're watching a movie, and then all of a sudden, conversation starts going into, the best type of women are this, the best type of women are this, the best type of women are this, and whatever. You need to have a filter to tell yourself that, no, the best type of women for you is the woman that you have in your house if you are married. Let me explain it. So, for example, let's imagine your wife is a bit on the plump side, and you're hanging out with guys, and you're watching a movie, and then all of a sudden the conversation goes to people like, the best type of women are slim, like Agbani Dereko. For those who are Nigerian, you understand, she was, I think she won some world global competition, beauty competition. She's really like your typical traditional model, and they're saying this is how women should be like. But immediately you tell yourself, no, the image of beauty for me is my wife, however your wife is. That's just, and what you need to tell yourself, especially if you are a man, I'm a guy, so I can probably give examples along the lines of being a guy, is that your definition of beauty for a woman changes as your wife changes. Pretty simple as that. So for example, if your wife, when you married her, she was slim and whatever, and by the time she starts having babies and whatever, she puts on a bit of weight, your definition of pretty women that is exactly right for you moves from whatever it was when you first married her to what it is at this current stage. That's a filter which you have to create in your mind consciously. Because if you don't create those filters, there are certain casual conversations that, let me use the word, they begin to sow seeds of deposits in your mind. And when you get opportunities, when opportunities present itself, like I said, with regards to, for us as Christians, sexual temptation is not just the actual act of intercourse. Sexual temptation, according to Jesus, is even if we look lustfully at someone else, we have already committed the act of adultery. It's pretty simple as that. So the standard for us as Christians is actually higher than the traditional standards for everybody, saying, oh, you have to be caught in the act before you are actually guilty. No, for us as Christians, the fact that our mind is thinking along the lines, we already are involved in that act. So the decision, like I said, every single time that we meet, we will always be having a decision that we need to make. So we need to make a decision for ourselves. So we want to overcome sexual temptation. What is the decision we need to make? The decision we need to make is, how are we going to protect ourselves from feeding desire? What are the active actions that we're going to commit ourselves to doing? That's the decision you need to make. I can only tell you about some of the decisions I've made. So let me give you an example. There are times in which I'm walking on the street and I actually see, it all of a sudden happens to me. I just see someone and I'm like, look, I think the way this person is dressing is a bit too much. You know what I do? I simply just cross over to the other side of the street. It's pretty simple as that. I make those decisions for myself. I don't give let me use the word, my rule of thumb is that I don't hold other people responsible for my own responsibility. I remember there was a time that my wife and we were in church, and it so happens the lady that sat beside me, the dress she was wearing was pretty short, pretty revealing of her legs. And throughout that service, I could not look at my Bible. Throughout the service, I was basically focused on the preacher man. Throughout the service, I was basically looking at the preacher, focused on the preacher, because I couldn't look down. That was the decision I had to make during the service. But there's a filter that I've had in mind, and the filter I always have in mind is that, look, if the person involved is a Christian, whatever it is, just first I always assume is, I always give the person the benefit of doubt. So I remember during that service, I just told my wife that, look, I think I'm going to mention to her that the dress she's wearing is short. And after we finished the service, I just whispered, I just said, oh, excuse me, I hope you don't mind. I just want to tell you, the dress you were wearing was a bit short. And she was like, oh, she's sorry, that she really didn't know that when she was leaving the house, she didn't think it was going to be that short. Pretty simple as that. For me, the only reason why I just made that to her was just to let her know. It wasn't that I was like, oh, didn't you know that you are making me not to concentrate in church? No, the responsibility for concentrating in church is mine and mine alone. And during that service, despite the fact that, as it were in quote, I had a distraction beside me, I still chose to concentrate on what the preacher was saying. The only thing was that I just didn't go through. I didn't open my Bible. I didn't look down to look at my Bible. I just had my eye up throughout the whole service. So what you need to do is you need to make decisions for yourself in terms of what are the filters you want to establish for your life. What are the disciplines that you want to introduce to protect yourselves from what you see, what you taste, what you touch, what you hear, and what you smell. It could be, I can give you different examples. So for example, I'm on a number of social media WhatsApp groups. Anytime I get anything which looks suggestive, I mean, it could be something as casual as somebody just talking generally that, sharing a story about, I see. It could be as simple as stories. But for me, I just make that, once I see it and I begin to see a line that just has any story that is along that, let me use the word, talks about unfaithfulness being something that is normal, adultery being something that is normal, I simply just ignore it. I decide on videos, I delete it, messages, I simply just ignore it. So for me, I've already told myself, if I see anything that, let me use the word, demeans faithfulness in marriage, demeans keeping your wife as your standard of marriage, I basically just ignore it as quickly as possible. It's pretty simple as that. So this is the decision you need to make for yourself to be able to win the battle against sexual temptation. Thank you very much for joining me. For those of you who are online, I didn't really get to see people whose names were on it. I know the only person I saw was Aminat, and thank you very much for showing up. Once again, just as a reminder, Saturday Night Conversations happens every evening, 8 p.m. GMT plus 1. That's 7 p.m. GMT time. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Wishing everybody a wonderful weekend, wonderful service tomorrow, a good time connecting with your family. Thank you very much.